We are good to go. This meeting is being recorded.
We'll call the meeting to order. Okay, to start with roll call. I'm Michelle McNulty. I'm here. Nate Reisner.
Here.
Estella Hollander.
Here.
Brendan Foley. And are you? Oh, I thought somebody was. All the musical chairs. Okay.
Yes.
Absent. Jess McNeely.
Here.
Jason James.
Here.
Paul Mood.
Here.
Steph Santana. She's just an alternative. I shouldn't say just, she's the. Ann Dunno. That's you.
Aaron's my alternate.
Oh, okay. And then is Romero?
Romero is here.
Okay, truly. Romero, truly.
Yes, Romero truly here.
Thanks.
You gotta call Jeff Bowman's name.
Jeff Bowman.
Jeff Bauman.
I'm
yeah.
here.
Sorry for skipping you. All right, we have a quorum.
Yeah, can I go ahead and call the roll for ours?
Sure. Yes.
Executive Director Morley.
Here.
Planning Manager Wessel.
Here.
Transportation Planner Gonzalez.
Here.
Transportation Planner Tavel.
Here.
Transportation Planner Austin.
Here.
Ty Holiday is Montoya Fellow. He is absent today, and I'm Karen Mueller, Administrative Assistant. And we have one guest present today, Chad from Coconino. Any other guests that I'm unaware of? Or is Armando? Is that Armando?
Yes, Armando Palacios. I'm also a guest
From where, please?
from MPD Department ADOT, Planner and Training.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you.
All right. Do we have any public comment from the public? Okay. And so we have the approval of our meeting minutes from September 24th, 2023.
I wasn't here, so.
Does anybody have any comments or want to pass a motion to approve the comment or the approval of the minutes? From September 24th?
We could either table them if people want more time to review.
Okay.
If nobody's willing to have the opportunity to do that yet.
Okay.
We weren't there, it's been. Robert's rules would still allow you to vote on the minutes.
You can even go back and listen to the meeting. Super
Line by line.
I'll make a motion to pass the minutes from September 24th, 2023.
So to get out of it. Can I get a second?
And this is Jason James. I will second that.
Okay. I think okay, Jason, we'll give it to you. Thanks. We have no items on the consent.
Oh, we have to vote.
Votes, sorry. All those in favor? Stay here.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, they pass. Thank you, guys. Thanks, Nate.
Yep.
And moving on to the consent agenda, we have no items. So we'll go straight into general business with consider election of a chair and vice chair for Metro Plan Technical Advisory Board.
Karen, do you want to provide a quick overview?
Okay, the bylaws require that each year we re-elect or elect a new chair and vice chair for the Technical Advisory Committee. There's no limit to the number of terms a chair and vice chair can serve on the TAC, and this term this year would be from January 24 today of 2024 to January 22, which is our TAC meeting in January of 2025. So I will open it to the floor for discussion or nomination.
And I recommend maybe we start with the chair position. If anybody is willing to serve as the chair again, or if Michelle would be willing to serve again.
I am happy to serve again, but I'm also happy if someone else would like to move into that role. Like the meeting minutes.
And if somebody would like to make a motion for Chair McNulty to continue as the chair.
I'll make a motion, for Chairman Multi to continue as the chair and for 2024 through, January 22nd, 2025.
I'll second that.
All right, I'm gonna. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes.
And then vice chair.
I'll volunteer to be vice chair again. Those of you online, that was Nate Reisner. Sorry.
I would like to pass a motion to nominate Nate Razor as vice chair for 2024 through January 2022 of 2025.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Passes.
Thank you. We're very appreciative of both of your service and being willing to continue again.
Thank you. Hey, item number 2, consider route transfer study update. Mr. Westman.
Thank you. Next slide, please. So route transfer study. This is really a reference for member agencies on the route transfer process. This is by the process by which one agency who has jurisdiction over the road transfers the ownership to another. So it's about the process, advantages and disadvantages to both parties, and an order of magnitude cost in terms of the implications of that transfer. This is not a recommendation that transfers should occur, nor is it a prioritization of the segments, which we'll talk about here briefly, that might be considered. Again, just kind of a reference document. Next slide. Why are we doing this? The original study was in 2008. And the reason for that study, go into the Wayback Machine, might be the only one who can make that trip. When the East Flag TI out by the mall was built, the marketplace was coming into place, and the city really wanted to see that TI built in conjunction with the marketplace at the same time. A lot of negotiations took place, part of which was route transfers. The city took over the road behind the mall and 89 in front of the mall. Some other things happened, but part of that was, and the city would study with ADOT transfers for the rest of the system. Now we're in a situation where we've been through the Milton Corridor Master Plan, and we're starting the West Route 66 operations analysis. And in the context of the Milton Plan, there's a lot of discussion, which resulted in a friction, if you will, with some high-level city policies, mode shift, carbon neutrality, and ADOT and frankly city standards on things like pedestrian warrants. And in part of the discussion, and I apologize, I don't know if it's exactly referenced within the document itself, was, well, if these routes were transferred, we could smooth the way to bring those into alignment in an easier fashion. It's a good chance that that same conversation is going to take place within the West 66 study, and that's why this route transfer study was initiated. Next slide, please. So in doing this, we've had conversations with ADOT, City Public Works, brief conversations with the county, and learned that, again, we'll look at these here shortly, that the study segments in terms of how to cut up the state system remain relevant. Identified there's a new process that ADOT actually adopted in 2012. There's advantages and disadvantages to both parties as were updated, and heard about concerns, which we hope we addressed in getting the cost in a kind of an apples and apples or one-to-one basis. And there's been some changes in the type of activities ADOT engages in. I'll also mention that there's been a few wildfires and
Floods.
a couple other things like snowmaking that have changed. We'll talk about that briefly. Drafts have been looked at by Public Works. ADOT did have a conversation with Brendan Foley just this morning. I know. Nope. This gentleman right here this morning.
Sorry, went to the wrong room.
Oh, sorry. No.
And with city traffic, and have incorporated their changes into the document. So I'll go over some of those changes momentarily. So next slide.
Can we pause maybe on the record that Brendan Foley has joined us?
Okay. It's not changing on my screen. Oh, there it goes. We did a little drag there. So advantages and disadvantages. As we all know from our work in this field, you know, one person's advantage is another person's disadvantage. So I'm not going to go through both sides of the coin here. So if ADOT were to transfer a route to the city, and primarily we're talking about transfers from the state to the city, they'll reduce their operations and maintenance costs. They'll reduce their exposure to risk, lower their time spent in development review and permitting, regulatory responsibilities associated with primarily environmental reviews, administrative burden dealing with complaints, data reporting, and other things. For city, if a transfer takes place, improve public responsiveness. You know, a lot of calls will come into the city. It'll be a unified response. They won't have to, and this is probably an advantage for the ADOT as well. They don't have to say, well, we deal with this, and they deal with that, go talk with them back and forth. Development control, right now it's kind of bifurcation between ADOT handling things, you know, within the right of way, the city outside of the right of way. This would be unified and simplified. The review process, there's mandates that the city has to comply with, and at the same time rely on ADOT. So making sure they can meet those mandates, operational controls, and then possibly transfer terms could accelerate priority improvements. Sometimes when a transfer occurs, just to expand on that a bit, there's a statutory minimum that the state would bring it up to a five-year maintenance standard. And sometimes there's some parting gifts and other things added to that, that might be beneficial to the city. You'll see highlighted in the bottom right, ownership costs will displace other priorities. And I'll expand on that in a bit in terms of some of the comments received. Next slide, please. Catching up, I'll look up here. So the process, this is just a very quick reference to ADOT's adopted process. I just want to highlight this box that I broke out here. As I said, this is a reference guide. Our update is a reference guide. Part of the mandated process is that there's going to be a detailed study associated with any formal transfer. So going into a lot of effort now would really not be a very productive use of time. So this is just to bring to people's attention that there is a formal process. There's a hyperlink in the document to ADOT study. So next slide, please. These are the segments. So, you know, the state highways kind of going clockwise from the top left, you know, there's 180, 89, I-40, I-17, and 66 West. And then in the center, Milton and East Route 66. You can see the different color designations. There's kind of a central piece in the downtown that combines parts of East and West 66 and Humphreys as a kind of a logical piece to transfer of the state system. By and large, in the review, these were still seen as logical pieces to speak of individually or collectively. I will take this opportunity to note that 89 north of, 180, 89, and 66 outside of the city limits are obviously within the county. And as I mentioned, the county has been peripherally or tangentially associated with this, but because the county is really not equipped to deal with traffic signals, overhead signs, and other things of that nature, transfers don't necessarily make sense. And these, parts of these highways really are more in keeping with ADOT's, kind of larger scale purpose of city to city or region to region intrastate travel. So again, not necessarily good candidates for transfer. Next slide, please. So we did update the costs on this as part of this. This is, so people, as should they consider a transfer, have some order of magnitude understanding of what it means. And there's two sets of costs: operations and maintenance, and then capital. So if there's a capital need projected in the future, if the route transfers, responsibility for that capital need transfers with it. So we wanted to, the old study included that. We wanted to bring that to attention. So in the previous study, there's a system, the PACO system that ADOT has. We made a run at that. We're seeing having some challenges getting things to really line up in terms of this apples to apples. So what we did was really just use simple inflation, 3% from 2008 to 2016, and then ADOT has a construction cost index that we inflated from there. And then we made some assumptions for a couple of these activities I mentioned earlier, like street sweeping that ADOT's now doing, some administrative costs that we weren't sure were originally included. Just made some assumptions to inflate that. For the city, really started with their budget and distributed that across the roadway miles the city has, with some assumptions, that you're going to do more street sweeping. You have more signals on the larger streets. Those are going to cost more. We worked with Sam Beckett at Public Works to, ballpark those and make sure they seemed reasonable. So we looked at the cost per lane mile annually for arterials and collectors. ADOT's routes, if you look at Milton versus, Fort Valley Road, are basically arterials collectors in terms of their physical description. So the cost came out very similarly, as you can see at the bottom of the screen here. There may be a little overestimate, a little conservative about ADOT's costs, but we use going forward. This is really the implication is for the city. And so that cost is really the one that's critical. Next slide, please. And maybe I'll just hit on this one, then I'll pause briefly for questions. For future capital costs, there were a number of tables in the original report using the same inflation factors. Those projects that hadn't been completed yet, we inflated the cost. And there's a big caveat. With the wildfires we've had, drainage has changed dramatically. The old study actually went through a fairly extensive drainage evaluation to look at needs. We did. And so there's just this caveat that, anything that transfers, there's going to be increased drainage costs associated with that. So I will pause there and see if there's any questions so far. Okay. So next slide. So here's some edits that were made, and I didn't get a chance to update this slide based on the conversation with Brendan this morning, so I'll paraphrase that. As I mentioned, the draft that was sent out, I don't think was clear on these policy conflicts, and as I explained it earlier, that's now been put into the document. clarifying that this snowball traffic and drainage issues, that these are management issues that have emerged since the original study that would transfer with this. And that disadvantage that I had highlighted earlier, and I still do on my screen. That if there's not an increase in funds to go with the increase in lane miles, service is going to suffer either across the system or on those new routes. So that's clarified. These interstate operations, and this was a conversation Brendan and I had this morning, and used his language, which was much tighter, that particularly on Milton Road, this came up during the corridor master plan, because of the potential for things to back up onto the interstate. There would possibly be some fairly expensive resolution down at the interchange to prevent that from happening. So we're to a point where ADOT would be comfortable with the transfer. So even though that's still in the report, there's this pretty serious caveat associated with Milton Road. Jeff Bauman in his review noted that engineering experiences a number of costs they were, I think, alluded to, but we kind of enumerated those a bit. Traffic control plans, striping plans that are not accounted for, and then the fact that these are pretty rough. Still a pretty serious factor. So those were the primary edits. Some other things that Brendan and I discussed this morning and have been addressed is a little more explanation, like I said, on Milton 17, that this is really a reference document driven by Metro Plan with fairly limited stakeholder input. And then a couple projects, Jeff Bauman mentioned that the 180 drainage effort has been completed. So we'll take that out of that table. And I think Brendan mentioned a pavement preservation job coming up on 66 and we'll add into the table in that segment. So I'll kind of pause there, see, Brendan, was there anything else that you wanted to hit on our conversation this morning?
I don't think so. I think you covered it all pretty well.
Okay, thanks. So what we are recommending is that the TAC would recommend to the board the acceptance of this route transfer study update. Happy to answer any questions if you have any. Yes.
One question. Well, yeah, thank you for the presentation. I think it is a really good reference document and hopefully a future stepping stone for future conversations. With that, I'm curious, like, what are next steps between city and ADOT, and especially like, where do you see, I guess, Metro Plan's role in maybe facilitating those conversations?
No, that's an excellent question, and I may punt this one to Kate here in a bit. So one point that we actually closed our conversation with this. I had the opportunity to discuss this with Paul Patnay and Clem Legaki and Jason James from ADOT Multimodal Planning Division, and Greg Byers, serendipitously, that happened to be their assistant director and state engineer, I believe is his multi-syllabic title. And Greg brought up the point that, this is, from ADOT's perspective, this is really about, in the interest of the traveling public, who is best suited to manage any given roadway. And I think there's a general agreement, financial issues notwithstanding, that in an urban environment, a city is going to be better positioned to manage, to meet regional objectives than the state would be. And I did make a commitment to try to introduce that statement of philosophy into this document. Excuse me, sir. As far as our role going forward, reiterate the caveats. This is not a recommendation that transfers take place. This is not a recommendation that any particular segment be prioritized. That said, at least regionally, we probably have a better handle on the transfer process as a result of this effort than, say, the city would. And I think there's an opportunity for us to help in the evaluation that would take place in terms of this route transfer process. And I think would be an opportunity, as we have in the past, to discuss funding needs and perhaps opportunities. So, the city, I always get these backwards. I think the city has Proposition 406, the county has Proposition 403 that deal with operations and maintenance. And, there's an avenue for expanded funding, for one thing, and I think we can assist in those conversations. The state, again, coming out of this conversation with MPD, is flexible, if you will, in terms of their terms. Example from Yuma, it was a multi-year transfer of Highway 95 that would help kind of fiscally absorb the cost and adapt. And, there's probably also potential for negotiation around funds. There are going to be opportunities, if you will, or circumstances that might beg a conversation. Major pavement preservation jobs that are bringing things up to that 5-year minimum standard. This one I just mentioned on Route 66, for instance, could possibly be one where, hey, it's going to happen, or there's some additional things, is this managerial primacy of such a need that take it on its face, or are there other incentives or terms that would make a transfer make sense? I'll look at Kate to see if she wants to add anything to that in terms of potential role Metro Plan might play.
I mean, I would just reiterate, we're not making any recommendations about doing transfers, but I think if partners want to consider it, we'd be happy to help with the study, help facilitate conversations. I think as far as West 66 goes, the timing was important just so that we could head off early any potential conflicts. And, if the city or partners are asking for things of ADOT that are not implementable under ADOT standards, then we have a quick number to look at with the leadership to be able to say, is this even worth discussing? Or do we need to go back and follow ADOT standards? And so hopefully resolve those kinds of conflicts early, because our goal on that plan was an implementable plan. So it's tied to that. But, if partners want to pursue any of this, I think we're happy to facilitate conversations, do further study.
I'm assuming, I think you guys gave a presentation to the executive board, which I do know has council members, but is like another next step presenting this to council to see if they want to have further pursuit? I mean, I just more simple next steps, maybe.
Executive board has not seen this
Yeah.
yet, so we wanted to this was a technical enough issue. We wanted to make sure the TAC reviewed it before it went to the board. So the board would see it. And I think I'd really look for the city to request that we present to council if the city's interested. I don't think we would push that without the invite.
Okay.
Good question. Okay, so again,
Excuse me, the only thing I would add, kind of along the lines of what you were talking about as far as your conversation with the state engineer, is that I think in the past there have been incentives, or however you want to look at it, given by ADOT to initiate that exchange. That may or may not be feasible, obviously, going forward, given our budget constraints. So I think to some extent, a better way to look at it is, as far as those differences in policy, is this something that benefits the city and Metro Plan area and ADOT as well, versus just, what are the incentives to make this happen? So what is the priority in making that change? Is it to benefit from a policy perspective in the community, or simply from an economic perspective? That makes sense?
Yeah, so what I'm hearing is, are the policy issues of such import that regardless of financial incentives, is it worth making the transfer? Of course, the state would still be required to meet their statutory minimum. And, I think we can pose that question in the document. But, at the bottom line, there's kind of two things on the scale. So again, we are looking for this. Staff is recommending that the TAC recommends to the board that they accept the route transfer study. Motion.
I move to recommend that the TAC recommend the board accept the 2024 route transfer study update.
Second that motion.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes.
Thank you.
I do have to step out at 2:20 for a different, I have to go on site to a meeting, or sorry, in 5 minutes, so can I put the gavel?
Yep.
Okay, and I'm just gonna step out now instead of being disruptive during the next presentation. And I'll hand you the paper. That's the gavel. Thanks.
Thank you, Dave. Moving on to, yeah, go ahead, Jess. Oh, you just went by. Item number 3, consider fiscal year 25 through 29 transportation improvement program. Dave, I think you're giving this presentation as well.
Thank you. And we're looking for the TAC to recommend to the board the release of the draft for public comment. So next slide, please. Transportation Improvement Program is a mandated document. It is our public-facing document showing where federal and other dollars will be spent on significant surface transportation elements. There's a minimum 4-year requirement. We have chosen a couple of years ago to go on a 2-year cycle. So this is a major update of that 2-year cycle. And just as a reminder, the 5th year, so 2029, is illustrative. So when we pursue a grant, we'll put that out in the illustrative year, and if we're lucky enough to be awarded, we'll amend that into an active year. Next slide, please. Some of the changes in this overhaul, and I'm able to share the screen in a moment. We'll get to look at one of these. Really trying to use project identification numbers. It'll make it easier for reference for us locally, and to have conversations with ADOT as they move things into their electronic or e-STIP. We're going to combine all the projects into ADOT projects into one table. Similarly, all of our planning funds are now being introduced into the TIP, and we're going to put a singular kind of planning table of funds together. And there's a new format favored by NACOG. It's a few more columns of information, and may need to try to resolve this from a legibility perspective. Hence the question, is it too small? And then all the other grants, because they have their distinct funding sources, we're going to put those in a separate table with the exception of transit. And I think we're going to have to maybe work through some of that. One of the things that ADOT is looking for is this distinct lines of funding. And so just a heads up, 5307, 5339 get presented in concert. And maybe we can move that, continue doing that, but we'll have that conversation. Next slide. So where have these projects come from? Basically everybody's respective capital improvement program. The current programs for the ADOT city and county, and updated CIP from Mountain Line. We are earlier in the process than we've typically been. We're usually having this conversation in April, when draft CIPs for 25 to 29 are actually in place. So in terms of a process, well, and because of the quarterly meetings that we're now having as a TAC, we're not quite able to stay on top of that, meet our call for projects, public review period. So what we are recommending is that in this interval, from now until the March board meeting, when they will release this for public comment, staff working with you all are able to make amendments and corrections and make this as tight a document as possible for public comment. And then during that public comment period, and I think we'll put some caveat in what we put out there, that as draft CIPs come forward, we'll move that into this document for your recommendation in April and board adoption either May or June. And then this will meet the ADOT schedule. So next slide, please. So the action we're looking for, and I'll try to bring up this unified table, which is another format that ADOT's looking for. Try to share it with us. So we recommend this board to the board, the release of the draft for public comment. And that public comment period will be for 30 days, starting in March. We've got actually extended to closer to the TAC meeting at the end of April. We need to update the maps to illustrate the projects. And there's a couple mandatory relationships that we need to speak to a little more clearly than in the draft document that you received. And that's how these projects relate to our goals and to federal performance standards. I received some guidance. Thank you, Jason James, for addressing that. By and large, because we adopt ADOT's performance standards for our region, it's really, and making that direct connection from a statewide performance to how we're doing with any individual project to move that needle. It's largely going to be narrative to say how these different projects address those, but not in a quantitative manner. We did receive one call for project from Rose Hauk, and it's for a bus shelter across from the adult center on Route 5. You know, she's had this conversation with Mountain Line, but it's looking at another avenue. We'll have that conversation as to whether this project ends up in the tip as perhaps unfunded or otherwise. And then this last bullet is what I've already mentioned in terms of working with you to bring new projects in or adapt projects if they've either increased in cost or moved out years. I'm going to try to share my screen and we're going to see what happens. Hey, look at that. Bring up the, there it is. So this is the new format from ADOT. That's good. That's even hard to read on a 5-foot screen.
That's pretty small.
Yeah, we're gonna get this figured out in terms of how to present this. But just to walk you across the information that'll be included. So sponsor we've always had. We'll now have our MP, our Metro Plan ID. As the ADOT project ID comes in, we'll use that. The project name and description have changed a little bit. We want to make sure we're speaking to the functional class. We need to have clear termini so that the feds and ADOT can see, you know, could go to a map if they wanted to figure out where a project is. I'm going to take a little moment to editorialize. Love to see that in the city CIP in the future. Funding source, and then a type and phase, and kind of working through that. Where it's possible, we're looking at the length. So here's the I-17 ITS system, 90 miles, and it kind of varies in terms of the lanes before and after, then a total project cost, and then the federal share. 24 is going to be shaded in gray. This is the year that we actually, obligated these funds. And then here's the other years of obligation. So you can see again on I-40, there's funds to be obligated in federal funds to be obligated in 25. So where we're now kind of lumping all of the match into one column. Before we had split it year by year. And we're looking at just the funds in the 4 active years, not in the illustrative year. So a little more information in terms of type and phase, length and before. We do have, it's a challenge. The concept of obligation it's about as bureaucratic as you get. So we have a situation like the 4th and Cedar roundabout was obligated, I don't know, like in 22. It's not going to be built until 25. So it would fall off, or it does fall off this table. Is that really what we want to express to the public and still meet what the feds want us to express, which is we've committed the funds back in 22. So we're going to probably be playing with this for a while. So again, the action that we're looking for is to recommend to the board that this be released for public comment, and it will be in much better shape by the time they see it in March.
Got a question, Dave.
Yeah.
So once the tip is passed, we can amend it if we have projects to add.
Yep,
Correct?
always.
Okay.
Yep, and if project falls out or project has a major change, we can always make those
Okay.
changes.
And that amendment happens, the first action on it would be a TAC action,
Yeah,
and then it goes to the executive board or the
executive board.
executive board?
Yep.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions for Dave on the 25 through 29 tip? Anybody want to make a recommendation or a motion to move the 25 to 24 tip for the board to release for public comment?
I'll make a motion that the TAC recommends the board release the draft FY 25-29 tip for public comment.
Thank you. Anybody with a second? I'll second it. Brennan seconds it. Thank you, Brennan. All in favor of moving the tip to board for release for public comment for the 25-29 tip plan? Okay.
Aye.
Any against?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yep. Thank you, everybody. All right, number 4, consideration regional transportation safety plan. David, this is also for you, and then you're looking for recommendation. Staff recommends that TAC recommend the board adopt the regional transportation safety plan.
Yeah. Buckle up. This is going to go very fast. So, yeah, I guess I'll go up here. So much of this you've seen in a previous presentation. That's why we're going to go through it so quickly, but kind of for the record, just to show the content. So covers the entire region. Plans will be, the plan will meet eligibility for both the Highway Safety Improvement Program and Safe Streets and Roads for All. The last plan was completed in 2018. We worked with NACOG and CYMPO on this plan, but each area has its own plan produced by Greenlight Traffic Engineering. Next slide, please. You can see the scope where we did the analysis, outreach, identified emphasis areas, and strategies for those, identified priority locations, and then apply the strategies to those with planning level cost estimates, and then resource availability. You can see it all on our website. Next slide. As part of our kind of new process, since we've got quarterly, we did assemble a project review team. In this case, and we've met a couple times. You can see the participants on the left and the questions we really posed to them. On the right, was it a reasonable process that produced reasonable results? Is our intent clear? This was kind of that, some of that should versus shall, consider versus will, making sure that we had a clear path forward. A check-in on strategies and projects that should be added or deleted, and whether there's adequate data in the body of the text versus the appendices, that the body of the text could be read without it. So next slide. Here's the process, kind of followed that scope. Next slide. So just a sampling of some of the data. Again, you've seen this general decline for Metro Plan as a region with that big dip in the COVID year of 2020. But things are starting to climb back up. Next slide. Crash severity, and in the analysis, they looked at the region and then broke it out by Flagstaff, that part of the county within the region. And there were important differences, urban versus rural, and we see those across the state as well. So next slide. We did look at crash rate per capita as opposed to a crash rate per vehicle miles of travel. Those staff did do some of that analysis just to kind of double check some of these things. And you can see, again, some of the differences when we look at Metro Plan and disaggregate that by the city and county. And you can kind of see where Metro Plan as a region kind of mirrors the state if you look at the far right column. And then you can see how it splits out between the city and the county. That fatal crash rate, pretty significant difference where we have higher speeds in the county. Next slide, please. We looked at crash manner and see, again, not looking into the data just to show you what was there in the analysis. Next slide. As we looked at the safety emphasis areas, what's important to us regionally, and what matters, what might matter. We looked at the crash data. We looked at, what's a priority or what's a major contributor within the region. Where does that differ from the state in important ways? Then looked at public input and TAC input on this to arrive at our emphasis areas. Next slide, please. This is that comparison of the data to say what was high in the region and what was high versus the state. And not surprisingly, weather and animals are more prevalent up here. The snow is deeper, the animals are bigger. Next slide. So at a TAC meeting, you adopted these. We did, I think as a result, we added 9 time into the process and kind of split these as behavioral and operational strategies that align with these. So next slide, please. Then we went into a priority location identification, used a variety of tools, looking at the analysis of the crashes themselves. Where did they occur? Social pinpoint. It was an interactive map where we really got a lot of good input in terms of people saying, hey, this was where we see car issues, bicycle issues, pedestrian issues. And then green light held stakeholder interviews with engineers, law enforcement, and other stakeholders to get a sense, and really use the 3 of these to come up with priority locations. So next slide, please. Here they are. You can see in that far right column where the number of factors that came into play. agency comment, public comment, and top crash hotspot in terms of helping with the priority locations. Next slide. So this is just kind of a continuation of that table. As you can see, we're down to just either one or a couple factors in the selection method. You can see project type, there's intersections, there's segments that were analyzed and how they rated. Next slide, please. So there were pages of strategies. We're not going to go through those today. The project review team, I really do going to commend them. They did go through, I think, 11 pages of strategies. We scrolled through those. Tim was on that, and as a result, we did add, I think, several across the different emphasis areas of strategies that could potentially be employed. So those are available to us through the safety plan. Next slide, please. The little out of order, but it's kind of the way it flowed. The safe systems approach is a federal highways approach. Really, this is in the document closer to the front in terms of how the feds would like us to start thinking about things. Really, it's a layers. I think they call it redundancy. You know, let's make our roads as safe as possible. Let's get users on board. Let's make speeds safe. Vehicles, that's really technology somewhat out of our control. And then this idea of post-crash care, you know, can we improve that? Again, somewhat out of our control there. So the some of the strategies and some of the approaches are categorized as to, are we approaching, you know, which aspect of the safe system approach are we actually applying at any given time? This will help as we apply for grants to be able to speak to this. Next slide. Again, from a really a federal expectation, I think it behooves us all to kind of get on board with this, but looking at an equity analysis and seeing where we do have some perhaps some issues where you can see from a couple of tables here, you know, are we seeing fatal or suspected injuries? You know, how do these occur in what's considered disadvantaged areas relative to Title VI communities like minority, low income, race? And looking at the number of projects that we have in terms of priority projects in those areas, and it plays out fairly well. The self-reference bookmark has been fixed by those. So next slide, please. And this is the kind of the intersection, pardon the play on words, where you can see the yellow lines and the blue dots, and where they fall within the shaded areas, which are some of these disadvantaged areas identified using federally available tools. And there's a decent overlap with those. You can see in the country club area, there's a disadvantaged area with a fairly large cluster of projects there. Next slide, please. So implementation really speaks to, excuse me, those were instructions to the project review team on the right. Where, you know, how do we, you know, get more people involved, incorporate safety into the project development process. And there's examples from our case studies, if you will. How do we do our reporting? I want to really commend the city on the work they're doing on an annual crash report. Pleased that their analysis and our analysis actually support each other. We didn't come with radical different conclusions. Policies and guidelines, and that really, we'll look at that briefly, but, you know, complete streets and Vision Zero. Again, case studies. We're looking with a follow-up study or companion piece on vulnerable road users. That'll be starting here in the spring to really look at the Vision Zero aspect. And then when we look at either safety projects or projects in which safety can be included at the design level. And then how can we fund these? And then different grant applications that we can pursue. So that's part of the implementation plan. Next slide. The appendix. The appendix is very large. We'll probably do a little excising because it has a lot of NACOG and CYMPO data still in it. But it does include some examples on complete street, as I mentioned. Really helps us look at the multimodal aspects of our roads and streets network and how can we make them safe for all modes. Next slide, please. Some of the examples include from Phoenix, Arizona, and Howard County. So we, have a couple of approaches that we can look at and see if there's a preferred one as we tackle this. And Metro Plan could potentially work with the city and or county to look at taking a complete streets step. We might even look at adopting our own internally that might influence some of our processes. Next slide. Safe system approach, we kind of walk through, but at their heart is 0 deaths, acknowledging that even 1 death is not acceptable. And it is really very interesting. There's videos from various states where, interviews with Joe and Jane on the street, and you just get down to it. Well, how many accidents do we have? How many crashes? How many people die? How many is okay? And it's like, yeah, people realize none is okay. And that's really the focus here. And so if we keep that in mind, that it's beyond the numbers, it really is about people and people's lives. It's kind of why Vision Zero is taking root. So next slide, please. And there's this idea that you can see that this human-centric approach, why we want to take this safe systems approach and how we can, by addressing all these things, we can move towards Vision Zero. Next slide. And again, there's a couple of case studies on Vision Zero and some other resources available that we might consider. So with the Regional Transportation Safety Plan, it is a requirement for HSIP. It meets our safety action plan requirements for SS4A. And as such, it's a great foundation for moving forward, and would ask that recommend that you recommend. We need a better way to phrase that. We recommend that you recommend the adoption of the Regional Transportation Safety Plan. So happy to.
I have one question, Dave.
Yeah.
Could you explain why we chose to do our crash rate per 100,000 people versus the 100 million vehicle miles traveled?
Some of it is availability data. We did have the regional model that we used. 100,000 was a little easier to compare across the state and region. And when staff looked at it, we shared some of that analysis with the TAC. There were some differences as we looked at it from a rate perspective, but not really dramatic. And at the end of the day, we have that analysis, and the decisions on which to pursue are all going to fall to the city and the county and the state. And I think anything that appears on the list within the plan is eligible. And I think in any application, further just kind of similar to the route transfer study, there's going to be more analysis that's needed to justify the benefit cost in an HSIP or more social inputs on the SS4A. Thank you.
Any other questions?
I just have a comment. So yeah, in the packet, you have the different priority intersections, and number 2 is the US 89 and Snowflake Trails End. And just wanted to mention, yeah, Mountain Line often receives requests. There's Sacred Peaks Medical Center there, and we have a bus stop across the street from 89. And we just often receive requests because, from the bird's eye, transit's right there, but it's, impossible really to cross 89. And so I just think, yeah, this information is really powerful, and we're sharing with the city to see if, yeah, we can get some additional improvements. And just noticing almost the top 10 majority are US 89. So
There's a real
dangerous corridor.
real cluster, as you can see from that map earlier, along 89 that we could address. So.
Any other questions on the safety plan? Not hearing or seeing any. Would anybody like to make a motion that the board adopt the regional transportation safety plan?
I'll second that.
I don't think we had.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh, you're. Well, I'll make a motion, sorry, it's not, for the TAC to recommend that the board adopts the safety plan.
Anybody want to second that motion?
I'll second.
Thank you, Jess. All in favor?
Right.
Right. Anybody against? Right. Moving on to item number 6, review of recent board action.
Number 5.
That's 5?
Yeah.
Thank you. Number 5, consider regional transportation plan amendment. Sorry about that. Dave, this will be yours. You're looking for staff to recommend TAC, or recommend that the TAC, staff recommends a TAC recommend stride forward to include reference costs, constrained and build out project recommendations from Blueprint 2040. Sorry,
Thank
I
you.
can't read today.
Mr. Chair. Yeah, so the reason for this is we took a different approach to Stride Forward, made it very graphic and very kind of executive summary. And the other thing that was really different about this is we really stopped at 2045, just looked at that kind of 2023 year window where previous plans had looked at the entire system from a build out perspective. And consequently, there were prospective projects that really aren't referenced cleanly in Stride Forward. That should development patterns change, we might want to include. So it's just a little more exhaustive list. And by just referencing Blueprint 2040 and the plan and program and recommended systems, it gives us a little more room to play, so to speak, as opportunities arise. We can look at those and say, yes, it complies with the RTP. It might not necessarily be an immediately cost constrained project, but it's still there. We can justify supporting it. So it's really just taking a couple sentences, as you see in your staff report, that you see on screen, and making a reference to Blueprint 2040 in terms of those system plan chapters and that recommended program. The recommended program is really the basis for Proposition 419. Stride Forward clearly supports 419 and 420. So we're covered pretty broadly from a cost constraint perspective. So we're just looking for TAC to recommend that to the board in terms of an amendment of the RTP. Our public involvement policy. This is the process by straightforward TAC recommendation to the board adopts for those amendments. So happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, David. Any questions from the TAC? Hearing any questions, would anybody like to make a motion? That the board amend stride forward to include a reference cost constrained and build out project recommendation from Blueprint 2040.
So moved.
I think it's just motions. Can I get a second? I'll second it. Okay, Brendan. Thank you, Brendan. All in favor of the motion for the board to amend stride forward to include by reference cost constrained and build out project recommendations from Blueprint 2040. I'll say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Anybody that is against? Thank you. Moving on to item number 6 now. Review of recent board actions. Kate?
Thank you. I'm not going to go through this. There's a staff report that summarizes what the board has done over the last couple months since the TAC met. And again, our move to quarterly meetings was not meant to keep the TAC from engaging with the board. So this is just a quick update for your reference, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions from the TAC? Not seeing any. There's no recommendations for that one, so we'll move on to item number 7. Strategic grant process, scoring criteria, and project selection. Sandra, you're going to give us an update on this one, and there's no recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's good to see everybody. So back in May, we met with most of y'all at our strategic advance. And we, hello.
Hello. This is not the Spruce Wash meeting, is it?
Nope.
Nope.
Upstairs. All right, sorry, thanks.
And we devised some strategic goals and objectives, particularly around funding. So we want to align our capital and our programmatic needs with priorities and fund sources. And we want to expand match and revenue generating options, particularly because of the BIL and taking advantage of those transportation dollars. And also looking at our region more holistically so that we can look at our projects in a more creative way to make stronger grant applications and to mitigate competition. So big picture, we really want to do a paradigm shift from reactive to proactive. And in my stakeholder meetings and in my experience writing grants, a lot of organizations look at grant funding that comes down the pike and they get really excited and they want to apply for everything, and that's great. And we want to re-wrangle that energy into something a little more intentional that streamlines, coordinates, and really employs strategy and really amplifies the purpose of a metropolitan planning organization. So I am the project manager for this, and the initiation is I met with all of you, and I would really like to thank you for your graciousness and your generosity in sharing your projects with me. So I met with our stakeholders and all of our members, and we talked about all of your projects and your priorities and what grants that you want to apply for. And so I collected all of your projects, very much like Dave with the CIP and the stakeholder meetings, and I made a giant list of projects and grants. So I've done 1 and I've done number 2. And then number 3 is now we want to analyze our alignment. A note on scoring. So member organizations have their own scoring criteria. Mountain Line has the way that they score their projects and their grants. ADOT has a way that they score. Everybody has their own internal scoring method. Then there's the federal government and the way they score projects. And then there is some hybrid scoring, right? Because at the end of the day, we really want to be smart about what we apply for, and we want to honor the scoring that already happens. We want to take into account the federal scoring, which makes or breaks your application. And then we want to be savvy in how we do this internally within our member regions. So I'm not going to go over this, but this is just a snapshot of what this looks like. There's 130 projects on the vertical axis, and then on the horizontal axis is all the surface transportation grants that are available. And so through these stakeholder meetings and through internal meetings with our team, we decided, we took our collective expertise and we decided which projects would make the best grants. And this is just a snapshot of what it looks like. Yellow means it's okay, and green means yes, let's go for it. And then orange means maybe. And there's still a little more vetting to be done. So I wanted to discuss with you today the kinds of scoring that will happen should there be competition. Because what we don't want to do is, I've heard two things from our stakeholders. Don't mess with the way we prioritize our projects, please. And two, thank you for this list, because this list that I made, I guess, has never been made before. So people are stoked on that. And then the second request is, don't mess with our scoring criteria, but how do we meet in the middle, right? So there's the federal merit criteria, there's the match question, there's the design question, depending on the nature of your project. How far along are you in design? Are you considering NEPA, the environmental review? And what is going on with right of way? And then also, how ready are you to execute your project? So that's where we're at. And then when we have this discussion at our strategic advance, we are going to dive further into project analysis regionally to figure out what grants we're going to apply for in the future, and then we're going to roll it out. So that's where I am in the process. And so let's go back here, and let's say, oopsie, got a little, okay. Let's say that there's like 3 members that want to apply for a raise in the same year, totally hypothetical, right? So how do we decide? What we don't want to do is submit 3 discrete raise grants to the same funder, because it's going to look weird, right? So when there is competition, I wanted to discuss with you, and I wrote a staff report as well. When there is competition, what final criteria are we going to use? And we thought about, match is the biggest bugaboo for members, right? The federal, the state and the local match dollars is a barrier to applying for federal grants, because they ask you to match between 5.7 and 20%. Then there's the focus on safety. So many of these DOT and FHWA programs focus on safety, as Dave just mentioned with the RTSP. Excuse me. Then there's the public outreach component. Then there's the documented support within regional plans that funders really want to see. There's strong multimodal components and some NEPA concerns. So I wanted to get your feedback today about, when there is competition, do y'all think that these elements are a good way to winnow out a project? And I welcome any comments or questions.
But I think, yes, coming up with this criteria is a good idea. But I also think that, at least from the county's perspective, even if our project isn't selected as high from Metro Plan, our board of supervisors may direct us to apply for a grant. It may not be as competitive, but we kind of have to do what we're directed to do by our political parties as well.
Yes, thank you for that. And I remember you mentioning that during our stakeholder meeting, and we're really hoping this is kind of a general way to approach this. But of course, there'll be case by case. If your governing body wants you to do something, we're not going to oppose it, right? We're not going to fight your board of supervisors. Stella?
Yeah, I definitely think having some sort of criteria is a good way to go forward. I agree. I think whatever matches the NOFA the best, or, that has the best chance, because putting together grants takes a lot of work, especially if a consultant's involved. It's a lot of money just to put together grant applications. So I think whatever makes the most competitive based on the NOFA makes sense. And it seems like your merit criteria matches kind of the main topics in a NOFA usually. One criteria I'm curious, maybe it was considered and then maybe taken out. So at least there's often, I feel like, either it's called many things, either like environmental justice or equity or justice 40. There's usually something there. I'm just curious if that was considered or not. Or I just feel like that is one piece that might be missing.
Yes, you're correct. It's missing in this slide, but it was not missing in our conversations.
Okay.
And so thank you for pointing that out. No, that's very, very important. And all of these DOT FHWA grants focus on equity, and they have special tools that they want you to use, like CJust and census disadvantaged tracks, like as used in Title VI and in RTSP. So thank you for bringing that to my attention. We're absolutely considering equity. And Dave's map, when he talked about the RTSP with the blue disadvantaged areas, those are really great, particularly framing for like Rays, for Butler, and the way that those tracks are adjacent to the project and how they affect. And even, you know, when we helped the flood control district Right Protect, the culvert upsizing project where the highway drainage systems happened, it wasn't adjacent to disadvantaged tracks, but disadvantaged communities heavily use 89. So we frame that argument as what is the economic impact of overtopping of 89 when post-wildfire flooding happens. So thank you. Any other comments or questions?
As we're currently updating the Flagstaff Regional Plan and the County Comprehensive Plan, I'm glad to see you've got this completed public outreach / documented support within a plan, because that's how we work with our governing bodies to say, we've thought about these things at the big picture. We update these plans every 10 years. These help guide us. Sometimes it's very broad guidance that you can demonstrate in alignment, even like in support of disadvantaged communities. But, you know, that's why we do those plans.
I have a couple clarifying questions, comments. So one, really appreciate Nate's point, but I do want to express to the TAC, our goal here is that we get our board members on board with our strategic grant seeking process. And that if, let's say, the county has a higher ranking raise application, that then the city would defer to the county's application and not compete. Because as Bob Holmes would say, who works for the county and the city, he would say, if both of you apply, neither of you will receive. So, so we definitely want to not have competition amongst each other within the region. And hopefully the board will buy into that, and then you won't be getting competing direction is ultimately the goal. I think I heard Estella say, so we've taken it through a process where we've looked at the NOFO criteria and kind of said what we think are good fits, okay fits, and, you know, let's not spend our time on this. At a high level, which considers we did talk about where are people in design, what's NEPA, how do you fit in the CJust equity tool in that analysis. And I'm hearing Estella say, like, as we vet, when there's competition, when there's 4 potential raise grant applications, go for the one that is the best fit and most likely to get the money. That's what I'm hearing Estella say. I think what we have up here is actually slightly different. We're saying, regardless, we've already kind of looked at what's a good fit, and now we just want to prioritize based on these things, potentially our high injury crash network, which might not be the priority of the particular application you're going for. Does the TAC agree? Like, we have so many needs, just go for the best project that's the best fit, that's still a high priority project for a partner. Or let's actually apply our own values and criteria to ranking within, or is it really just about what's your best application? I think that's a key question for
So
us.
there's another thing to think about, especially with the smart.
The AZ Smart Fund.
AC smart funds. There's a requirement that if you go for those funds, that you apply for a project within a certain time frame. So if that doesn't align with Metro Plan's priorities, and then that agency is then stuck paying back that.
So a good criteria, I think that's a great point. Maybe one of our criteria is award of AZ Smart Funds. And if somebody's got smart funds that are gonna that they're gonna have to pay back, that would bump up your application to make sure that that's a priority, because we don't want you to pay back your design money. So that could be a good ranking criteria.
Okay.
We don't want you to pay back.
Thank you, Kate. Anybody else have comments or questions? This is really helpful to guide the final product.
Did we answer? I feel like we didn't answer your question.
Do people agree with Estelle? Like, whatever the best application is, everybody's got so many needs, just do what we think's the best fit.
I mean, the best fit one to me makes sense because if it's a city project, it's still gonna be benefiting county residents because everybody in the city is a county resident. If it's a county project, it'll still be probably benefiting people on the state transportation system. If it's a state project, is gonna be probably benefiting all of us as well, so.
Yeah, and I feel like you can have both, like where it's the right fit from the NOFA perspective, but it's also a high need in the community. I would think hopefully those align because I feel like the NOFA is going, like looking at the crash data and, you know, all these points. So I'm thinking hopefully they both align. For some reason they don't, then yeah, maybe it is like an earmark or congressionally directed spending, or maybe, I don't know, maybe then these DOT grants somehow aren't the right funding method, but hopefully there would still be a way to fund it if for some reason the NOPA and the need didn't align.
Thank you.
I think one other criteria that we might want to think about is the ability to deliver the project. Because it takes staff time to deliver the project. So I think that needs to be thought of from our agency standpoint of if we're gonna apply for this grant, do we have somebody that can actually move this project forward when it's supposed to be moved forward? Because even though most of them, ADOT is going to be administering, it still takes staff time on behalf of the local agency.
That's absolutely right on. And there's a whole project readiness. DOT, with the advent of the BAL, the DOT put out a grants navigation dashboard that has all types of tools and resources. And one of them is a whole module on project readiness, how to look for that, how to assess that, because project readiness is often a merit criteria in the federal grants. So thank you. Yeah, this is by no means exhaustive. I was trying to be brief. Okay, thank you. Any last questions or comments?
All the grant workshops you guys have put on have been very helpful. It's helped the county identify the grants that we want to try to pursue once we kind of get in position for them. So doing this type of work and the grant workshops have been helpful for us.
Glad, thank you.
Any other discussion? Okay, move on to the next one. Number 8. Creative local match option, cannabis tax 501c3, developer impact fee, LTAF2, short-term rental fee.
Thank you. So that's neat. And since we haven't seen y'all in several months, I just wanted to refresh your memory about Creative Local Match. And this is a quick refresh. So I just talked about the advent of the BIL, the IIJA, that increase federal dollars and therefore increases our need to meet match, right? So if there's more dollars, there's more match. And so I was hired off of a 5305E grant objective, which I'm writing a white paper on statewide and local match options. And so I've researched 10 creative local match options, and I have to say that the common thread is that all of them involve a long game, whether it's enabling legislation or some sort of internal policy change. And then each option offers an aspect of funding and a portion of funding, but it should be considered a single facet of a larger funding strategy because, you know, we all know that no one thing pays for a project. So the first option that I researched or that I'm catching y'all up on is 501c3. So I do not have a transportation background. So when I learned about metropolitan planning organizations, I've worked for 501c3s my whole professional career. And I thought MPOs were 501c3s, which is a tax designation, but I was wrong. They're not. They have a special intergovernmental designation that we're nonprofit, but we're not a 501c3. And what 501c3s can do, which is like libraries or hospitals or anybody with this designation, is they have greater access to different funding streams that require a 501c3 status. So in praxis, that means that, for example, we applied for the Bloomberg Asphalt Art Grant and we couldn't receive the money directly and we had to pass it through to a 501c3, which is Creative Flagstaff. And so if this is an exploration on whether MetroPlan should become a 501c3 or in the larger white paper scheme, should an MPO have a 501c3 status? So some metropolitan planning organizations have a 501c3 arm that's like friends of that they use for like research or other pursuits. And so this has the potential to integrate transportation into other fields and potentially to expand creative local match funds. This is just a pictorial of the possibilities of, let's say, demonstration projects and things that one could fund through winning grants that make you have a 501c3. So big if metropolitan planning organizations decide to become a 501c3, they have to do things a little bit differently. Here's some of the considerations. They have to do their taxes a little bit differently. They have to file a 990. They have to track their accounting a little bit differently. And that's, staff resources. Anytime you change a process, you have to dedicate staff to it. And then there are barriers and rules to lobbying that are pretty strict.
Question.
Yes.
As a 501c3, do you have to be an do you have to have an LLC with the Arizona Corporation Commission?
If Metro Plan were to consider this, we would have to form a second organization. So yes, we would form a Friends of Metro Plan organization.
Okay. Which leads me into this next slide. So thank you, Kim. So
We can swap money later about that.
So I just talked about considerations, right? Now I'm going to talk about the risks because every decision is accompanied by a risk. So in the case that let's pretend that Metro Plan becomes a Friends of a Metro Plan, and let's pretend that we dissolve. That's unlikely, but we have to entertain the possibility, right? So there's an asset question. So if we were a 501c3 and if we were to dissolve, we would have to redistribute our assets to another 501c3. And in our world, that means our fund balance, our partners' funds, and our capital assets. So that's a risk. And then what we just talked about, becoming Friends of a Metro Plan, having another arm that's a 501c3 is significantly more admin. And then it also is contingent on the reliability of federal funding, which is why we exist in the first place. So that's my first option. And then, we're fleshing this out and I'm putting this in my white paper. And if people are interested enough, we will consider this in FY25. Any questions or comments before I move on to the other one?
A couple comments. I think the meetings we've had have been very helpful. We've already, worked together, identified some grants, doing some applications. It really helps us look forward like a year in advance and kind of prime some projects so you're not getting caught off guard when that NOFO drops and you've got, 2 months, 3 months to get something done. So it helps us, pre-plan.
Cool, thank you. That's the idea. So I'm glad that's happening. Any other questions or comments on 501c3 before I move on? Okay, cannabis tax. So this is creative local match, right? So when I was casting a wide net, I was like, where is the money in Arizona? And it's like, some of it is in cannabis. And this is Prop 207, and it's called the Smart and Safe Act. And it passed into law in 2020. So the state of Arizona collects 16% of an excise tax in addition to sales tax on recreational cannabis, which is like kind of big bucks. So in 2023, that much money was collected, $182.3 million. So where does this revenue go? So here's a breakdown. And surprisingly, a quarter of this revenue goes to HERF, which is kind of cool. The world of HERF, I've learned so much about HERF. I am not going to go over this diagram with you, but I will say that cannabis has a healthy contribution into our transportation world. And here is the breakdown. And so we do get some transportation monies off of this tax. Oh, and HERF revenues, the most recent FY 2023 is $1.75 billion. So locally for Coconino County, that means that Coconino County gets 1.1 million in HERF and Flagstaff gets a little under $1 million. HERF exchange. Oh, so I was like, hey, if HERF funds are being funded by the cannabis tax, could it become local match? And the short answer is no, it cannot per ADOT's policy. So if somebody in Arizona wanted to undertake a rejiggering of cannabis HERF funds to fund something else, they would have to go up against ADOT. So that's the short. I'm not gonna go over this slide in too much detail, but that's the short of it. So there's, if we wanted to relook at tax redistribution, no matter what tax it is, it's always enabling legislation. So that's a whole process. And so this cannabis tax is protected by the Voter Protection Act, so it would warrant like a whole other vote. That was the outcome of my research. Any questions on cannabis?
One question. So I'm not super familiar with HERF. So does ADOT get that like 800,000 and then give like, or does Metro Plan manage that money or no? ADOT gets it and then maybe distributes it. to
Yes,
different-
I think ADOT gets HERF and then it goes through this thing. Right.
Okay. And then it sounds like it'd be changing the legislation to make those monies like different.
Correct.
To be
So
able to use.
if transit was like, you know what, we want a slice of that HERF. So then it would have to be, and it would have to be enabling legislation and a vote, right? So you'd have to rally your council and your board, and then it would go to the local conversation, and then it would have to be like an actual vote, because I learned that this particular tax is protected. So anytime it gets redistributed, it has to go to a vote.
It's a statewide vote.
Yes, statewide vote. Thank you, Kate. I was like, I'm looking for a word. It's not local, it's state. Jason, hi.
And let me just, if you can keep that on slide, this is Jason right here too. And I just also want to just really clarify too, as far as the portion of the HERF that ADOT actually gets to further operations, things like that, just go to the lower right-hand corner of that graphic. So just want to just very clarify that all the HERF monies that we do get, again, once we do all the off the top distributions, all the distributions we have to do to the counties, the cities, the towns, MAG and PAG, the general fund, everything else, we only get that lower right-hand corner. And even that percentage, majority of it does go to debt service and our operating budget. So in actuality, we don't have a lot of, we only have a small percentage of discretionary funds that we actually use out of HERF. So just wanted to put that out there just for clarification. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's so helpful. That answers Estella's question way better than I did. So appreciate that. Any other comments on cannabis tax and HERF before I continue? Okay, now I'm going to talk about developer impact fee and the LTAF 2, which is a local transportation assistance fund that comes from the Arizona Lottery. So first I'll talk about developer impact fees. Developer impact fees are a one-time fee paid by a developer with local government approval for a new development project. So this is one way that municipalities can fund transportation projects that are connected to an economic development project. And developer impact fees have to be incorporated into local planning processes, and they have to be in your capital improvement plan. So developer impact fees, a lot of states use them to fund their infrastructure projects, and Arizona has one of the strictest developer impact fee statutes in the nation. What is good and bad about developer impact fees? It can be a reliable funding mechanism. It can be used as local match. And the cons are, so Arizona is very strict about developer impact fees. So when municipalities want to attract businesses, the gift clause is like, you can't look like you're privileging one business over another. Like you can't look like you're doing like Trader Joe's a big favor, but like In-N-Out Burger not, right? So there's a gift clause caveat. And then developer impact fees take a really long time to implement. It's a long game, and you have to be really methodical about illustrating transparency, which I believe is called a nexus study. You have to really be clear about how are you devising this fee and is it fair? And it is litigated a fair amount in Arizona. Flagstaff does use impact fees. It's built into their building permits, and currently it pays for infrastructure for police and fire. That's how it's used locally right now. So these are the components of designing a developer impact fee structure. You define the service area. You're like, where am I doing my economic development? You establish level of service standards. You come up with your fees and your payment timing. So this is super high level how you even start to design these kinds of fees. And then there's all these implementation steps, goals and objectives, nexus study, in integrating them into your plans, public hearings, admin stuff, drafting ordinances, all the admin. And then finally, really preempting, looking at how are you going to get challenged and who wants a refund. And it's fairly contentious, but if it works, some states have done some pretty cool things with it. In Arizona, I'm not, again, not going to go over this whole graphic, but I just wanted to illustrate at a high level, really what it takes to implement these kinds of things in the state of Arizona. Okay, now I'm going to move on. Actually, before I do that, do you have questions on developer impact fee? Questions or comments? I'm trying to move quickly. Been several months. Okay, thank you. Okay, so LTAF 2 and Arizona lottery revenue. So before I get into LTAF 2, it used to be part of the lottery revenue, right? So the Arizona Lottery Commission follows the Arizona statute as to who reaps the benefits of lottery ticket purchases. So right now it's higher education, health and human services. And under the business and economic development category, Maricopa County sued in 2010. Jan Brewer came up against a funding shortfall and she got rid of LTAF 2 for everybody. And Maricopa County was like, I'm sorry, nope. And they won their lawsuit. So they are the only county that gets LTAF 2 monies for transit. The Arizona General Fund gets the lion's share of the lottery revenues. So what is LTAF 2? It is an acronym for Local Transportation Assistance Fund, and it was alive for just over a decade, and it did fund transit in Arizona cities and towns. And it was transit monies that the transit agencies could use for capital projects or matching federal grants. It was a very flexible funding source, and then it went away in 2010. As I mentioned earlier, Maricopa County kept their funding. They sued under the Clean Air Act. Flagstaff couldn't use this argument because our air is too clean. So what would it take to reinstate it? So the ASTA board discussed reinstating this and they didn't do it, right? But if there's enough consensus and interest, there could potentially be LTAF reinstatement. The Lottery Commission decides upon this revenue, so it's wise to include them in the conversation. And then also legislative support, right? And the arguments could be made about congestion reduction, economic development, leveraging funds, and then reduction in road and highway maintenance cost with the idea that people are using transit more with these funds. I think that's it. I have one more. Does anybody have any questions about LTAF 2 or comments? Okay, last one is short-term rental tax. This is our Airbnb. So short-term rental tax is taxing things like Airbnb and VRBO, and it has the potential to fund transportation, again, via enabling legislation. Locally, the city of Flagstaff does collect this kind of tax that's built into the beverage board and yes.
Yeah.
Beverage board and
Bad board and booze, so.
yeah. So any sort of, it's a hospitality tax. So Arizona has like a base, it's called transaction privilege tax, and that's a fancy word for sales tax. So there's a base rate and then legislation passed that adds 2% on top of that so that it becomes a source of revenue, right? And the rate was increased through local ordinance, and the rate is regulated by the Arizona statute by a law, and also the Department of Revenue in Arizona, ADOR. Those are all just like the sales taxes in Flagstaff. So there's a state specific statute, right? So the Arizona legislation decides how you can tax things. Then there's local ordinance, and then there's revenue distribution. And so locally, so if any municipality is interested in doing this, they certainly can. In Arizona, in Flagstaff, there's a local BB&B ordinance. It was adopted in 1998. It was renewed to 2028. It funds the things on the left: tourism, economic development, arts and science, administration, beautification, parks and rec. So if these beneficiaries and percentages wanted to get challenged, it would have to go to a vote. And, you know, a municipality could certainly argue and advocate for those revenues to be dedicated to transit and transportation. It would just require a vote. And I think that's it.
All right.
Questions on short-term rental tax or any of the other options I mentioned?
Questions?
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Sandra. Moving on to number 9, West Route 66 operational assessment update. Andy?
Thank you. Appreciate it. I just have some brief updates for you all today. Wanted to go ahead and start off with our project advisory group since we haven't really talked about this since September. So we wanted to welcome Jess McNeely to that group. And Jason James just joined as well, taking over for Myrna in her absence. And right here is just a list of some of the we're currently working as a group on developing our project criteria. And we're looking at this as a funnel. So we're looking at high level, then we'll move into that medium and low where we get more specific. And that will just help us to, you know, identify the best project for the future scenarios along the corridor. Next slide, please. And I'll show you some of that right here. So this is an example of the criteria format that we're continuing to work with the PAG on developing. We're pretty good on policy-based goals, our definitions, objectives, and high criteria. We are continuing to work through the medium and low criteria and just some definitions of what these mean and where they came from. So the policy-based goals and definitions were really derived from the review of local, regional, and state planning documents and their related policies. And this really ensures that, you know, what we are proposing aligns with the community's expectations. And it also helps to lead to that implementation as these goals are already established in our community. The high, medium, and low criteria, we'll use that, as I said, or as you saw in that last little graphic, help to funnel down and narrow our project selection to identify that best project that can respond to a range of potential future scenarios as identified in the regional plan update. And then, of course, performance trends and targets are expected results from these policies, objectives, and those criteria. And so our next step coming at our March meeting with the PAG is to get into more details about scoring methods. As you are all aware, that can be a tricky topic. So we're going to come in and have a very robust conversation with everyone to figure out the best method to move this project forward in selection of future projects. Next slide. And this is just a quick little snapshot of what we have accomplished so far since starting the planning project. Got a lot of our early deliverables, of course, done, our background information, environmental scan, drafts of the public involvement plan, etc. All those have been reviewed by the PAG. We received a lot of really great feedback, and we are continuing to update those documents based on that new information that we have received. And then in progress, that finalization of our criteria. We're really close to almost done with future conditions reports. So we'll be sending that out to the PAG here soon for that initial review. And then we'll be moving into those baseline operational assessments and basis of design documents as well. Tie those all together. Thanks. And then I just wanted to bring these two important items to you. We do have a change in our project schedule timeline. We ran into a delay due to the procurement of the network software. Dave can correct me on what that's called. And that's really to support the work that NAU will be doing for us on this project as our technical assistants. So we anticipated about a 3-month delay, you know, to get through, you know, procurement, advertising, and, you know, obviously contracting. That takes a little bit of time. So we will be updating the schedule soon and have that sent out to everybody, pending any other hiccups that come between now and then. And then the second item, not necessarily a hiccup with 419 tax funding. It is a big component of the conversations we've been having with the PAG. So we are continuing to understand what those funding expectations are and any restrictions that may come with that. Dave has drafted a memo, and we've been receiving feedback from city staff so far. So once we finalize that memo, we'll be sending that out to the PAG to ensure that we're all on the same page. But no, we have not found any significant information that would change our project direction as of yet, but just at least wanted to bring it to your attention that it is a conversation piece that's coming up. And I believe that is it. I'll see if there's any questions.
No questions? All right, thank you. On to item number 10, Metro Plan happenings. Kate?
Great, just a couple quick updates here. So one, again, I want to welcome Kim to the team. We're very excited to have her. The board approved the transportation demand management planner position, I think in October of 2022. So excited to have Kim on board and get that program going. So welcome, Kim. Aubrey Flores is also going to join our team. She is an NAU Climate Corps member, and they have a great program right now for free assistance if you're interested, if you can tie it to climate action. So look at the NAU Climate Corps program for more help. Some updates on grants since we've seen the TAC. The city was awarded $9.6 million for a Safe Streets for All grant for Butler. We're very excited about that project. So congrats to the city. Can't wait to see it happen. They're currently working on a raise application for the eastern side of the Butler corridor. So we're helping gather support letters for that. HSIP applications are open. I think there's a number of projects going on now. And on the county side, I will say we are still waiting to hear about the county's Protect application. The latest as of yesterday is now the deadline has been pushed back to late February. We'd have been hoping to hear in December. I've heard that this is tied to not having a budget, so a federal budget, so that makes sense. Great, so those are the happenings. Obviously, a lot of other great things happening, and I'm appreciative of everything staff's doing. The progress on plans and our grants process is really exciting. So that is all I have for that. I will, on this last slide, just add as a happening that we have the advance between now and April. So the advances are joint meeting of TAC board and management committee. It's scheduled for February 15th. It should be on your calendars for that afternoon. ADOT's going to host us. Thank you, Brendan, and your team. So we'll be back at that office. Major topics will be our strategic grants process and hopefully vetting through any, what was the word you used? Competing projects for certain grants and coming to resolution on that, as well as some safety updates. So those will be our major topics for the advance.
Any questions for Kate? Happenings? Right, going into closing business items from the board. Board members may make general announcements, raise items of concern, or report on current topics. Anybody on the TAC have anything they want to bring up? All right. The next scheduled technical advisory committee is going to be April 24th, 2024, and we'll adjourn this meeting at 3:20.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for stepping in.
Project, and we're gonna kind of rank those.